All right, thank you. All right, tonight we're going to talk about becoming simpatico. Now, the first few slides are not on your sheet because since it is Friday, it's time to make sure we review and remember everything we learned all week, okay? Normally, I would give out a blue book and we'd give a quiz and we'd have a grade and, make me feel comfortable as a teacher, but we're not going to pressure you to do that. My standard technique as a professor was to make exams so hard that students could not cheat. But we're going to make this easy. I already have some questions tonight, so it's going to be pretty easy on you. I don't have to ask you questions. All right. So first, what have we learned so far? Choosing wisely in the first place lessens the chances of failure later. If you're not married yet or contemplating it, if you are already, well, you already made your choice. And if you feel that you didn't make the wisest choice, you need to find those issues that have prevented you from doing it and work on it. So there are things to look for in a potential mate. Are his or her parents married and are they happy? If the person did not have parents, who brought them up? Are they happy? As I tell you, I spent most of my first 6 years over my grandmother's because of the family situation. And my grandmother and grandfather were just great people. And my aunt lived next door. And we actually had a real problem because I was probably the fattest little 6-year-old you ever saw because I'd eat at grandma's and then I'd go next door to my Aunt Gilda and she'd say, "Did you eat?" And I said, "No." And I got another Italian meal there. People who come from happy, stable families generally have a much better chance of a happy, stable marriage. This is stating the obvious, but not everybody looks into this. And sometimes we use our hormones more than our brains. What was his or her childhood like? If somebody's had an unhappy childhood or has been abused or so on, that needs to be dealt with, and it might need to be dealt with counseling. In our own church, we insist on people receiving premarital counseling before we'll marry them so that we help them on the road that once they are married, past issues have been addressed as much as possible. He or she ever physically or emotionally abused? Well, that has to be dealt with beforehand, not something you find out 10 years later that underneath the surface you're having a problem handling things. Does she or he or she have a healthy sense of deserving the best for themselves? In other words, there's nothing worse than a doomsday partner. Everything is a tragedy. Everything doesn't work. Oh me, oh my, this ain't going to work. And what was the relationship with her father? Turns out that I've seen this over and over again and heard this in psychology classes, that if a woman has a bad relationship with a male figure, chances are she's going to have a tough time adjusting to a marriage with a male figure. And vice versa. What was his with his mother or other female person in their lives? Okay, so hopefully we learned something from that. I might put that down too. Okay, so what did we learn about expectations? Well, the world today is just filled with expectations that are not realistic. To be frank with you, Mary and I like to watch HMN. Anybody know what HMN is? Hallmark Movie Network, HMN. It's the 4 Kleenex network. Do you know what I mean by 4 Kleenex? I mean, they're romantic stories, and we like romantic stories. And what happens, of course, is there's always some tragic. They meet in some fantastic way, and then there's a huge obstacle put in their way of getting together. They conquer that obstacle, and they kiss and make up, and there's a happy wedding, and the story ends. We like those stories, as I said. But in life, the story doesn't end at the wedding; it just begins. So his expectations, I like this. This is one of my crappy ideas. If we want to get from here to there, we always think we can take a straight line path. Life doesn't work that way. It's usually very convoluted. Anyone who's done research knows that if you think it's going to be just easy, just going straight in one direction, and everything's going to come nice and smooth in the laboratory, you have never really worked in a laboratory. One of my biggest problems in encouraging students is to make them realize that when they have a failure, find out why. That some of the greatest experiments in history were experiments that failed. Like you don't probably, maybe one or two people here know who the Michelson-Morley experiment was. Basically, it had no result, and that's not what they expected. But it was a tremendously important thing to figure out why it didn't have a result. And the same thing is true in our lives. If we come to a situation where we lost our path, we got to find a way back on. Okay, so things to remember. First, that partners in a marriage must hold fast to each other. This is absolutely critical. Having relations, emotional or otherwise, outside of the marriage usually leads to problems and trouble. You need to be committed to your partner above any other relationship in life. And if that isn't true, you're going to find yourself in difficulty. And we've seen time and again where marriages go on the rocks exactly because they don't have a commitment to each other. Outside forces, the job, another woman, another man, an old relationship, friends that drag you away. If you have friends that want to go bowling 3 nights a week and you stay out every night and you're not spending time with your family, you're going to have trouble. If you have an old girlfriend that you just can't let go of, you're going to be in trouble. I had one guy that I used to know in college that used to keep pictures of all his old girlfriends. Now, I could never do that because if I did, my wife would probably burn them all up. So, it's not something to do. Fortunately, I'm so old that when I had girlfriends, they didn't have cameras, so we don't have any old pictures anymore. All right, this applies to prior relationships, whether they be with friends or family. So often, this becomes, what I said in that session on in-laws and outlaws, family, even meaning well sometimes, can interfere in a marriage in a way that makes things very uncomfortable. And you need to understand that you're the new family, you're husband and wife, and you have to do what's best for your relationship. And if family sometimes pull big guilt trips. We used to kid my mother that she was the master of guilt, and my mother never ever hit us. When my brother and I were growing up, if she said "Oh, you've disappointed, I'm so disappointed in you, you're making me cry," that was it. We were dead. We did what whatever she said. As we grew older and got married and everything, I realized, that guilt trip isn't going to work. Because if she wants me to do something that Mary and I don't feel comfortable with, I had to tell her, "Mom, you got to stop. We love you, but the line is here. Okay, you're not going to come in to my family discussions and change decisions that Mary and I made." And that happened very early in the marriage, and frankly, we didn't have any problems after that. And once the place is known, the longer you drag out a bad situation, the worse it gets. And too often in life, we tend to postpone problems because we don't want to deal with them because we're not comfortable. We're going to have a bad situation, so I'll put it off. I can guarantee you that when you have a bad situation, and especially someone interfering in your marriage, if you put it off, it's not going to get better. It'll probably get worse. And even more telling is you give the person who's causing the bad situation the thinking that, "Oh, I can win." When if you cut it off at the roots, you will find less problems. This applies to forsaking immorality. I know that today this is, I want to talk about this sometimes to Sunday school classes, teenagers and everything. The immorality that is going on in schools today are just nothing compared to when I grew up. Some of you have been to college, live in a dormitory. Anyone live in a dormitory? Were they co-ed in your day? Okay. No such thing when I went to school. And boys were there, girls were over there, and there was a house mother. And the house mother watched what you were doing, and if you didn't behave, you're thrown out. I'll never forget, I'm telling a little rat story. I took Mary back to the central nurse's residence, and she ended up, it was close to curfew time. You had to get out at curfew time. She sat on my lap, and they canned Mary for it, and it wasn't pleasant, was it?
It was just a note on my door that was not good behavior, proper behavior.
Yeah, today sitting on somebody's lap is one of the most trivial things you could find in the dormitory, right? I'll tell you something, how bad it is, okay? At one university where I was an administrator, we came in to argue the budget. This university had about 15,000 students at the time. So we came in to argue the budget, and I was arguing for engineering, and the dean of medicine was arguing for his school, and blah, blah, blah. And the dean of student health services said, I need a fairly big increase. Well, it was a tough budget year, and it looked like no one was going to get an increase. And we said to him, well, what justifies your increase? He said, well, last year, we had to treat 13,000 cases of sexually transmitted diseases among the students on campus. He said it was only 6,000 the year before. And it was like, I don't know how we argue against that. Now, of course, that doesn't mean 13,000 out of 15,000 students were doing it. I mean, one student could have been treated 5 or 6 times. But can you imagine that kind of statistics? This is a true story. It's probably about 30% of the students were having multiple episodes. And so we asked him, we said, why isn't there more teaching about abstinence, protection, blah, blah, oh, we can't do that because the state legislature objects to us actually teaching things too blunt because we're going to put ideas in their head. Now, please don't laugh. Like, do you have to really put ideas in the head of an 18, 19-year-old? No. So this idea of immorality is treated so loosely nowadays, but as I pointed out in the story of Joseph, it's not just a sin against the individual. It's not just a sin against your marriage and something that's going to make your marriage crash. It's a sin against God. Okay, what applies to the woman as well as the man? So all of these things I've said here apply to both parties in the marriage. Okay, how do we learn about making love last? What do we learn about that? How about that? I love this picture. Slightly older than me and Mary. I believe the couple here that got them off the web that were celebrating their 90th birthdays. Making love last has all the aspects of love have to be in a marriage. Okay, erotic, love, sexual passion, that's really good stuff, right? You need to have that. But if you stop at this point, if this is all you have in your relationship, you're in trouble. Philo, friendship. Mary, without a doubt, is my best friend. And the person I could bounce ideas off. Sometimes, even when she didn't understand what I'm doing, just by talking to her made me understand what I was talking about. And I think the same thing here. I don't know much about medicine, but if she came home and had issues on the job or something, she'd talk it through with me and learn to be a good listener. Sometimes I picked up some things I needed to know. But most of all, we picked up the friendship through it. We realized that each other could have a shoulder to lean on. Agape love, unselfish love, is perhaps the most important aspect. You need to be willing to give even when it hurts. So if you have all 3 of these attributes in a marriage, you're going to have a pretty happy marriage. But it's not going to happen just once. It's something you have to work at your whole life. Okay, so and then what are the problems and obstacles to marriage? We went through that. We learned that. The number one problem is lack of commitment. If you're committed to the relationship, you're going to be willing to work at it. You're going to say, it is important for me to make my spouse happy. If I'm not doing that, and it works both ways, important that you have good communication, that you're willing to talk to each other without the volume level blowing the room out. You need to have a good sexual relationship, and that should be something that makes both partners comfortable. No one should be doing something that the other partner feels is uncomfortable. I can't tell you what the limits are, and that's up to you. But it's up to you and your partner to work that out. Money is a big problem, and I think I gave lots of hints on how to handle money. And there's some questions here we can talk a little bit more. But if you handle money poorly, you will run into trouble. And same thing with handling your in-laws and your outlaws, your ex-friends. You need to deal with them if they interfere in the marriage. Abuse, if abuse occurs, you need to definitely get professional help. Same for addictions. And you need to be willing to do it. And finally, job stress. This one almost killed me at one point in my life. Okay, so I didn't necessarily in rank order. They're roughly in rank order, but for any particular case, one of these may be more important than all the others. These just happen to be on the average. This is the most important, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. But for a particular case, this might be the most important, or this might be the most important. Okay, so today we're going to talk about being simpatico. That's today's lesson. Simpatico is a very nice Italian word. It means something a lot more than I can explain in English. I'm going to have to explain by telling you about it. When two people are simpatico, they almost are like one. Now, it's kind of weird, it's kind of weird about how you think. So maybe Mary and I have been married so long that it's almost uncanny sometimes that I'll be thinking something and I'll say something and she goes, I was just thinking that at the same time, and vice versa. And that comes about just because we know each other so well. It's not magic. I don't have ESP. I'm not we shouldn't be lab freaks to be studied. Because as you get to know a partner really well, you kind of think on the same wavelength of things. Okay, so I want you to notice some of these borders. We'll talk about them later. So what does it mean? The dictionary definition says of like mind or temperament, compatible. That's not too bad. You're of a like mind, but you're like mind together. And you're very compatible in all you do. The English dictionary doesn't quite cut the subtle nuances of the original Italian word. Okay, the Bible definition is the one I actually like better. Okay, the Bible definition is given in the Song of Solomon, chapter 6, verse 3, and repeated similarly in chapter 7, verse 10. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. And I am my beloved's, and his desire is for me. So each person is looking out for the other person's desires. Each person is trying to satisfy the other person's needs instinctively almost. And here again, the Apostle Paul in Ephesians, he says, however, let each one of you love his wife as himself. And let the wife see that she respects her husband. Well, very few people end up hating themselves. If you do, you really need good counseling. It's about mutual admiration, respect, companionship, friendships, and sometimes two hearts beating as one. It's all of these things make someone simpatico. So how do you do that? You work at it. It's something you need to develop. It's something that comes about by being willing to talk to each other and work through problems without exploding. If you've got a bad temper, you're going to find yourself not being able to communicate. What always surprised me was some people that Mary and I've counseled time, they would have terrible arguments with each other and do things that they would never do at work. They would never think of going to the boss and shouting at the boss and screaming at him if they didn't agree with him on something serious. But when it's somebody that they're married to, it's like, wow. If you act at work unprofessional, you pay a price. But if you act at home unscripturally, unchristian-like, You don't think there's a price? Well, there is. Okay, so this is what happens when you get along like a cat and a dog. You ever have a good fight like that? I like this one better. Boy, did I struggle to find that picture. Okay? Um, some cats and some dogs actually can get along. And if a cat and a dog can get along, a man and a woman can actually get along. Two things block that path. One is that men often are insensitive to women's needs. Second thing is that women often assume the man doesn't know something when there's never been any communication of it, because, basically men are dense. We need to be told straight up. Don't tell, oh, I expected you to do this. And I go, really? No. Communication works both ways. So this success to be simpatico is to have good communication skills. If you don't like something your husband's doing, whether it's in the bedroom or the kitchen or on the job or whatever else, you need to talk it out. Say, I'm very uncomfortable with that. I'm not happy with that. Maybe we should try some other way of doing it. Effective, honest communication from the very beginning, starting during courtship phase and continuing through the marriage. If you're having trouble communicating with each other and have lots of fights when you're engaged, you probably continue on right into the marriage. You need to settle that up front. If you're already married and you're still arguing without being able to communicate in a calm, reasoned way, you're in trouble. Now, men often think logically, women often think more emotionally. And we both need to know what kind of limits to put on that. And a happy marriage couples are not just great lovers, they're also each other's best friends. I can't emphasize this more. We've seen this over and over again in church. The couple that's really close in friendship, that you can see it almost when they sit down, when they talk to each other, when they smile at each other, when they walk out of the building holding hands. And a couple that's kind of disentangled, you can see that too sometimes. If your mate is walking 10 steps behind you, that's not good in our culture. There may be cultures that's acceptable, but it's not really healthy. This is what the apostle said in several places. They that do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate. So good works come about by good communication. They do good to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. By the way, the word share here and communicate are the same word in the Greek. So what it's saying is you need to be able to share your thoughts, and you need to be willing to share your works. That makes for effective relationships. Again, in Hebrews 13 and 16, but to do good and communicate, the ESV says share, forget not, for with such sacrifices God is well pleased. So good sharing of ideas and thoughts and communication, sharing a life, is something pleases God. That's pretty interesting. And not only going to please your partner, but through your relationship with your partner, you really demonstrate whether you really love God, because your partner's right here. God is up there. Okay, so simpatico also means love is unbounded. There's not limits to it. You can say, I only love you if. That's a bad sentence, period. If you are right in the absolute sense of the word, or even if you think your way is more logical, it does not automatically make it a better spiritual solution. I need to emphasize this because in our society, the emphasis is on winning. And what I'm saying here is you can be totally right, and you still might be better off giving in a marriage for the sake of the relationship. You need to differentiate what's really important from what's really trivial. And too often we blow up things because it's important to me, instead of thinking about it, well, is it really that important to the relationship? If I have a situation where I need to win at all costs on something that is totally ridiculous, how do you know it's totally ridiculous? Because your partner just feels so uncomfortable with it. And so the idea of winning is so American, we just got to, we don't like losers. Anyone remember who came out second in an Olympic race? Does anyone remember who came out second last year in the American League pennant race? Anybody? No, I'm a pretty big baseball fan. I have no idea. I have no idea. We might remember who came out second in the NFL because it only happened a few weeks ago. But if I asked you 5 years ago who came out second, you wouldn't know that. The idea is here, sometimes coming out second is no problem. It's not an issue. Love is not about winning. A husband and wife are on the same team. You need to learn to work together. It's not a situation where one wins and the other loses. It's a situation where you don't want the marriage to lose. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. That's exactly what the apostle's telling us. You don't have to win. It is not irritable or resentful. Anytime you have some doubt about how to practice love, go and look at 1 Corinthians chapter 13. It's one of the most marvelous chapters in the entire New Testament, perhaps in the whole Bible, about teaching us about love. And these two verses really encapsulate everything that I wanted to say about being simpatico. Love is patient. It's kind. It does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It's just, I can never even think of putting it even close to better than this. Okay? And this is the one I really wanted to emphasize. All these other things I think we might have heard before, but you don't have to be right. The marriage has to win, not the individual. Okay, so summing up, resolve to be faithfully committed to each other as we know our Lord Jesus Christ is faithful to us. That's important. Develop trust between yourself and your partner by being absolutely honest. A happy marriage at any age cannot be built on a foundation of secrets and lies. So sometimes you find people just feel uncomfortable opening up because of the way they were brought up. People brought up in different environments. We had some friends in New England where the tradition is really, really brevity. So you'd ask somebody a long thing and say, "What do you think of this?" And they go, "Yup." And what do you think? Nope. And pretty soon you felt like you got to pull the person's teeth out to get a conversation going. It shouldn't be that way in a marriage. If your wife or your husband asks you something, you should say, "Okay, what do you want to know about it?" If you can't trust your partner, who else are you going to trust in life? If you can't do that, perhaps you should have never married in the first place. And don't worship material things, or they will become a stumbling block. Now, we went through all these verses before, but the one on commitment is Ephesians 5:22-33. I suggest reading that. Ephesians 5:21 about trust. And material things, there's just tons of verses in the Bible on that. And the one I like here is, I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. That is something that probably is the key to long-term happiness. Because if you think you're going to go through life on this wall here and go, everything's going to get richer, 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 well, it didn't happen to me. It went more like this. I had times when we were really doing very well. Then we had kids. And all of a sudden, we were really hit. And I'll tell you why we got really hit. Because our well, we lost one kid. And then the middle kid came out as a preemie. And I have a very interesting story about him. And since I got time to waste, I will tell you the story. So I get called at work, and you was 7 months pregnant. And she says, I think I'm going to deliver. I said, it can't be. It's 2 months. I don't know. I said, no, it's not a logical mind. No, you run. Oh, no, I know. Okay. I went, got the car, rushed home from work, brought her to the hospital. Sure enough, 4 pounds came out. Okay. Then he was having trouble, medical issues, so they transferred him in a little box with oxygen to Long Island Jewish Hospital. And 30 days later, he was big enough, weight enough to release him. So I go to get him out, and I realize I hadn't been with the phone company a year, so my insurance did not cover any pre-existing condition. And pregnancy was a pre-existing condition. So I went to check him out at a hospital, and they said the bill is $12,500. 1966, $12,500. I could have bought 5 Cadillacs. So it was equivalent to $150,000 today. So it was more than a whole year's salary. So I went to check him out, and we had in the bank, probably because I was only working a few months, we had in the bank probably about $500. So I went to check him out, and the nurse says, you need the release slip because they won't let you go home unless it's paid. So I go down and I said, well, the company will loan me the money and I can send you the check and I'll take it again, advance against my salary for a year, and I have a letter. No, you need to pay now. Well, my credit card limit at the time was $2,500, so that wasn't going to cover it. So I said, okay. I went back up to the floor and I said to the nurse, why don't you prepare? I'm getting ready to go home. Everything's fine. I'll get the thing for you. Get everything together. Put it all in there. Oh, good. So it's fine. So she got everything together. I tell her, I'll take the baby. She says, what are you doing? She says, we're leaving. So we start out of the building, get down the elevator, out of the building. The nurse calls down to the security, and 2 guards come meet us with gun. Where are you going? You didn't pay your bill. So I said to Mary, I turned around to the guard and said, you're going to have to shoot us because we're leaving. And I says, I can just see the headline in the New York Times. Man and wife shot dead for trying to take their child home from Long Island Jewish Hospital. Well, the guys didn't know what to do. We got to go back in and call. And I said, let's just keep walking. Let's get out of here, get in the car, and leave. We went home. There was no headline in the New York Times about being shot to death. And the company did lend me the money, and it took me time to pay it back off. But so, you know what? If I had 6 months of earning, I still couldn't have covered that bill at the time. Nowadays, we don't have this problem. We're not going to have a preemie.
I hope not.
You're right. He has turned out to probably be the most energetic and everything else of all the kids. He's president of his own company today, so he did grow up, and it's one of those things in life. At the moment, it sounded hopeless, and then I just decided, you know what, I'm going to do what I think I have to do, try to do the right thing, and let them see how bad they're going to do it. And the fact is, because we communicate so well, she trusted me to get them out of there. There was no scene between me and Mary. We knew what we were going to do. And I told her, we're leaving. And the guy pulled the gun. She didn't panic, nothing. She trusted me that we were going to do the right thing and be okay. Okay, so develop your communication skills. I have said this many times this week because it is really at the heart of every serious marital problem. If your spouse is unwilling to talk to you, if he's unwilling or she's unwilling to understand where a problem is and do something about it, you're not going to have a happy marriage. You're going to have a miserable life, in fact. Being able to discuss issues, really listen to your partner without disparaging them. I think, we've seen this in counseling. We're like, well, she says something that's really stupid. The minute you say that, I know that this person's already doesn't get it. Or worse, ignoring their concerns is another thing that you find happening. Well, I don't want to pay any attention because her concern or his concern isn't real. It's trivial. I don't give it any consideration. This the first step in finding solutions to a disagreement is being able to face up to the fact that what's a problem for the other person is a real problem. And the other thing to think about is don't ever say, well, that's just their perception, because perceptions are reality. If the other person really feels a certain way, you need to deal with that feeling. There's not some mathematical standard that calculates and says, well, that's not a real problem. It's a real problem for them. Okay? And you need to be willing to compromise. Almost all disagreements are amenable to solution when love dissolves away rigid positions. Again, take a look at these verses, Matthew 5:25 and Luke 12:58. The idea of being willing to compromise is essential. Is there an absolute perfect solution to every problem? Of course not. Is there a way that maybe you can give in and the other partner can give in a bit? Of course there is. To deal in absolutes is to deal in impossibilities. And finally, be willing to lose. Just because you may be right doesn't mean you have to win the argument. So I want to emphasize these things. In a courtship, in a marriage, in dealing with this. And by the way, this is not such a bad idea even in bringing up children. If you don't have effective communication with your children, they're going to have a problem. And learn to fight fair. This is something emphasized over and over again. Confine your discussion to the issue at hand and avoid dragging up the past. Acts 3:19. God will not only forgive sins, but he will forget them. In Acts 3:19, he says he will blot them out. So in the kingdom age, it's not going to be something where you're in the kingdom age and 500 years later, God says, oh, remember those sins you used to do? That's not going to happen. Once God forgives a sin, he blots it out. Now, we often will forgive, but we will not forget. And we keep dragging up other issues. You'll find that fighting fair is an extremely important thing. Confine your discussion to the issue at hand. Not that, oh, you always support your mother and you never support me, when the issue is the dishes are dirty and I really need your help to clean the dishes. That's the issue now. Or you always leave socks in the middle of the living room floor, right? That's my wife's favorite one. So you know what happens? Socks are still left in the middle of the living room floor. Not really. Because if she does, she's picked up some habits from my mother. If they're in the middle living room floor, they end up in the wastebasket. So you got to be careful about fighting to confine your discussion to the issue at hand. Bringing up and dragging up old ills that should have been settled or should have been passed by or forgotten is bad practice. It will lead you into trouble. And I need to emphasize that God promises us that. He says once your sins are forgiven, when the times of refreshing comes from the Lord, he says in Acts 3:9, he will blot out your transgressions. And when that blotted out means they're going to be just covered over with ink. And you will never see them. And you need to deal the same way in your relationships with your partner. Talk about the issue at hand, not about some thing that bothered you last year or last week or 2 hours ago. Learn to forgive. Here is a very interesting thing. We will never be perfect, nor should we expect in our marriage partner. If you truly love your spouse, forgiveness will be essential to maintaining a happy relationship. Now, I want to point this out, that forgiveness is an absolute first principle. You agree? I'm going to read you this because I think it's really important. So hang on while I dig up my Bible, or one of my Bibles. I have a lot of Bibles on this thing. Let's see, which one do I like today? Let's do this in, this version. Matthew. And here we're going to talk about Beatitude on the Sermon on the Mount. He says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the merciful," verse 7, "for they shall obtain mercy." So if you're not willing to give mercy, you're not going to get any from God. Verse 9, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." So think of what Jesus was teaching and how that applies to a marriage. Meekness in dealing with each other, merciful in dealing with each other, and being willing to be the peacemaker in the family. You don't have to win the argument. And if something has happened that hurt you, you need to talk it through and eventually forgive and forget it. And somebody once asked to me, famous question, right? It was asked to Jesus, "How many times shall I forgive?" And they said, but he always does that. Well, that's because that's the thing that he's weak at. So how many times do you forgive? Well, Jesus' answer was 7 times 70. And he was asked, and the apostle said to him, "Do you forgive 7 times?" Now, why did they say 7 times? Because in the Jewish teaching, that's the number of times you forgave a person. They put a number on it. And if you did it 7 times, the 8th time, they didn't forgive you anymore. But when Jesus said 7 times 70, he wasn't just saying 490 times. He was saying you need to be prepared to forgive as often as necessary. Now, how does that work out in reality? Well, if the partner really isn't trying at all and doesn't want to deal with the problem, then it's not a matter of forgiveness anymore. They've put themselves in a situation of just continual. But if they are willing to deal with it and they've worked at it and they slip again, you need to help them. That's how that works out. I think the Sermon on the Mount is probably pretty neglected. I'm not sure that people feel comfortable with this nowadays, because the idea of being merciful and meek and forgiving, it goes against winning. You know, if you're right, you need to win. It's just the American way. Maybe it's because we have such a sports-minded culture, right? In sports, nobody likes to be a loser. In marriage, it's okay to be a loser. It's okay to give in. Be wise with your finances. If you don't know how to make long-range plans, again, it's a good idea to seek advice from a professional. We're very fortunate in our church. We have a professional financial planner. And with young couples, he's been willing to help them free. And it's been necessary. So don't use intimacy as a way of controlling your relationship. There's probably nothing that messes up a marriage more than using sex as a tool to get your way. And without going into bloody details and getting an X-rated class out of this, I think some of you need to understand that whatever makes your partner uncomfortable is not to be done. And you don't use that as a tool to get your way and say, okay, this is my weapon. Because you know what happens in the end? You not only lose sexual intimacy, you also lose any chance of being able to communicate together as two decent human beings. Resolve to make decisions jointly so that they don't lead to power struggles. I pointed out that if you're going to make a big ticket item, make some limit that's comfortable with your income. And anything above that limit, you need to discuss and both agree. So, for example, Mary used to have a $5 spending limit, right? Now Mary's spending limit is infinite, and she's kept within that. Control your anger. Arguments that lead to insults, verbal or physical, should not be tolerated. I think this is probably causes more breakdowns than anything. Where people don't know how to communicate, so the volume level goes up. They don't know how to communicate, and they get angry. And unfortunately, once you reach that stage, the other person isn't listening to you anymore. You are just making sounds that go out into the ether without anyone paying any attention to you. So if you are in that situation, I think one of the questions here, which was a good one, what is the best way to ask for space when in a heated discussion? That's really an outstanding question, because everybody runs into that. Believe me. I can be totally succinct and get really mad. I have to learn to control that. I got a few questions because I know we're coming near the end, but this is a very good point to get at. How do you do this? How do you control it? How do you step away from it? You want to take a shot?
Well,
You got to stand up so everybody can hear you, sweetheart.
I know.
And then I'll correct you when you finish.
Well, that I know. Goes without saying. Some of the things that they say in classes or on how to do it is,
Yeah,
that's true. Take a deep breath. Think twice about what you're about to say. Maybe say, excuse me, go in another room. Again, take a deep breath. Maybe you don't want to do it in front of your partner, and come back again. Or table the discussion till you can calm down.
Yeah, she's telling me exactly what we do, Rob. If it gets a little heated, sometimes it goes, let's take a break, go make some coffee, get me a biscotti, we'll sit down, come back on it in a half hour. Take a break.
Coffee, a glass of wine,
Yeah, wine's even better.
Those help.
Yeah. That's even better. Or sometimes you just say, all right, cool off, and then let's go for a walk. And when you start walking, you're out in the fresh air and everything, you get out of the confinement in the house and you can discuss it. And sometimes you sit at the table and say, look, I think we've had enough discussion tonight. Let's come back to it tomorrow. Most problems don't need to be solved instantly. But if you find yourself getting out of hand, stop. Take that breath, get some space, but both of you need to agree that that's not the end of the discussion, that you will come to a resolution, because there is a bad habit of walking away from a problem, not willing to deal with it at all. Taking a break is not the same as saying, I'm never going to do it. And I mean, to be frank, I think you and I have always followed the maxim, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Normally, we take a break, it might be a half hour, an hour, go for a walk, and we'll come back. We don't like to go to bed mad. I don't think we've ever done that in 57 years.
I will say, if we have a disagreement about something or we're getting a little heated, John has the knack to make a joke and I can't help but laugh, and that's the end of the whole thing.
Yeah, but they can't all be as funny as me.
I mean,
a good sense of humor is helpful.
You know, one of our boys said, "You two never argue over anything important. It's always trivia." And I think that's a good, for us, that's a good thing.
Okay, good. Thank you. So, good. I don't think the next question.
You want to do these now? You got
well,
me
because
more.
it came in
Very good.
with this. We got so. Don't let problems linger. That was the other point we were making. The longer an issue remains unsolved, usually the higher the barrier comes to reach accommodation. The Apostle Paul advice was don't let the sun go down on your anger. There's no question about that. So what do all these marginal things mean? This is the African symbol for love from Ghana. And it's two hearts intertwined. It's kind of pretty. Then this is the Irish symbol for love. Again, two hands, one heart. It's again, one heart, two hands symbol. Kind of cool. This is the Italian symbol for love, which is pretty obvious. And the heart is always involved in these symbols. This is, I'm told, is the Chinese symbol for love. What does it say? And then this from India. I picked this up. Very beautiful. One of my students gave me. That is a gift like that. It's kind of pretty. So delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. That's what Psalm 37:4. A good marriage has a spiritual basis to it, I believe. If you both have good faith in God and you believe that the Word of God is important in your lives, you're going to have a different spiritual attitude to facing problems in your life. Okay, so that's the end of all the formal things. There are several other questions here that I want to hand over. Maybe Mary will hand over too. Thank you. And any more cards? It's your last chance. Going once, going twice.
This one, I think you've covered quite a bit already.
How do you create financial security when each of you has different spending habits? Yes. Mary and I have very different spending habits. Me, I hate to spend money. Mary hates to spend money, except on things that I don't care about, and vice versa. So how do we kind of compromise in that? Well, one thing is, what I said earlier, you make a budget. Know what your limits are that you can spend. The idea of just spending what you need and just charging it is going to get you in trouble. So if you have a budget and you know how much you have available, you need to then discuss how you're going to use that money every month. I used to get paid once a month, so it was a monthly decision. And it got easier actually with Excel. Chart, spending, everything. This was really cool. We used to have to do this, believe it or not, with pencil and paper. So financial security is something you can also create by being willing to put aside some money and not spend your full budget. As I said, for many years, once we paid back the debts from grad school and the preemie, we tried to put away about 5% of our income. And now I have millions of dollars.
Jeez.
Okay. What do you do if you have a very analytical spouse who views romantic things as check off the list and follows a formula for some things, relying on past things and doing the same romantic things, not attempting anything different, and asking the other spouse to feed him romantic ideas, thereby killing any romance since the spouse has the job of thinking of the things to be for her. Now, that is a mouthful. So let me see if I got this right. You want to know how to make life more romantic when one of the partners is a nerd. Is that kind of summing it up? Right?
That's what it
Does
sounds
everybody
like.
know what a nerd is? A nerd is a person who's person without a lot of imagination. Okay? So how do
No
you
sensitivity. Put it this way. Another.
Your shot.
No sensitivity.
You get first shot at this one.
Hints. I think a spouse can drop hints of what they like or how they'd like to spend time with one another. Maybe leave things around, little subtle hints left around, that maybe a booklet or a magazine open to a page that looks quite inviting. I don't know, I had some others that we wrote down. Oh, and worst comes to worst, talk to your spouse. Let them know what things make you happy, what things you'd like to do. Maybe it's a romantic weekend away. Maybe it's bring me roses once in a blue moon, not because it's Valentine's Day or it's my birthday or my anniversary, just because. I had a son who I found half a dozen roses on my doorstep one time. And when I opened it and who it was from, I called him up and I said, "Thank you, this was wonderful." "Why?" "Just because." It's a great answer. Just wanted to do it. And John's one of those guys. He'll say, "Oh, I was in Costco today and I saw these beautiful roses," and hand them to me. Just because. Those are some things that can be done.
And if all else fails, chocolate.
Yeah.
Chocolate. It's great stuff.
I think those were the three things I came up with.
Okay. So I got this question. What are your thoughts about gay and lesbian marriages? Everything you've seen in the whole week long was based on biblical principles. And if there's anybody in that kind of a situation, I advise them to take a deep look into what the scriptures have to say about it. It's not part of this course. So I'm not going to comment any further on that.
Is that it?
I think I've covered everything. Yep. Okay. Is there any other questions? Well, you're an easy class. You're not making me work very hard. Okay, so thank you again very much for your attention. And if you're grabbing one of these books and you want me to sign it, I will. And if you don't want it signed, I won't sign that either. I do need to tell you, of course, what you heard all week long is about 40% of the book. So you will find a lot more details in here and more statistics, numbers, things that can help you out in ways that, and in the book also, it's one of my favorite pictures of a happily married couple. In the book also is a good reference guide to all the biblical verses, so you can study them out if you want to. And there's also a reference to numbers of websites and other things where you can get more professional help and linked into professional help if you need it. Okay, so there's a lot of resource stuff in here, and I hope you enjoy it. Again, thank you very much for being such a great audience all week. I really appreciate it.
We certainly want to thank John and Mary both for heading south in the wintertime to get out of Michigan, so they can come down to the balmy weather here in Illinois, spend the week with us. So we appreciate that very, very much. We have evaluation forms we would ask that you please fill out if you would. And then once you do that, you can come up to the front table and get a book, or they can pass them out or something.
Have you got enough books, everybody?
Yeah, just